Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on this week's episode of The Walking Dead Monster. So without further ado, let's begin. After two solid action-packed episodes, I was expecting things to quieten down this week and was prepared for a much slower paced installment of the show, similar to those which I've been accustomed to watching during the last couple of seasons. However, The Walking Dead is showing no signs of winding down and provided yet another action-heavy episode that once again managed to entertain me for the majority of its runtime. All in all, it was another solid entry to the all-out war story arc. However, I do feel that it did perhaps have a few more obvious problems than the two episodes that preceded it. First off, I'm going to discuss the big talking point from last week's episode, that being the reintroduction of Season 1's Morales. I feel that the conversation that took place between Morales and Rick did a good job of illustrating the strange parallels they have both taken on their respective journeys. Morales mentioned how the pair of them had changed into something they weren't proud of in order to survive. And I like how the show seems to be trying to make a point that Rick isn't actually that much nicer than Negan. In fact, he's a pretty shitty guy as well, but he just so happens to be the shitty guy we are rooting for. There were also some cute little throwbacks to the first season of the show within the dialogue. It was strangely heartwarming and nostalgic hearing Rick mention the names of those who died since Atlanta, whilst also being quite sad at the same time. In addition, I'll admit I also cracked a little smile hearing Morales refer to Rick as Officer Friendly. The interaction that took place between the two Walking Dead old-timers did have a lot going for it. Well, that was until Daryl turned up and fired an arrow through Morales' head, killing him before Rick could even try to stop him. Honestly, I really can't believe that Walking Dead brought back a character from the first season, 7 seasons later, just to have him be killed 15 minutes into an episode. It just made the whole thing seem kind of pointless. Admittedly, Morales was never the greatest character when he first appeared on the show. Granted, a lot of fans probably wouldn't have even remembered who he was when he showed up during the end of episode 2 if it weren't for Rick explicitly saying his name and mentioning Atlanta. However, despite this, I still feel like there was a lot of wasted potential in killing him. To me, it felt like a real sucker punch having Morales die so soon after he just came back. After laying waste to Morales, Daryl and Rick spent their time fighting through a wave of saviour reinforcements until some quick thinking on Rick's part allowed them to gain the upper hand. I feel that the corridor gunfight was probably one of the better choreographed action sequences to come out of this season so far. Having Rick and Daryl facing a ton of firepower from opposite directions made for some tense viewing, even though deep down I knew neither of these characters would ever be at any real kind of risk. I'm also glad that the aftermath of the battle did a great job of answering one of my lingering thoughts that occurred when watching episode 2, by having Rick grab Gracie out of her crib and hand her over to Aaron, who I will get onto in just a moment. Thankfully, the showrunners weren't silly enough to have Rick let a poor baby just die of starvation, and I'm happy they resolved this issue. Finally, before I move on to discussing some of the other plot points, I want to mention the last scene of Rick and Daryl together, which featured Daryl killing a defenseless saviour who had agreed to provide him and Rick with some information. Now, I've already seen a lot of talk on the internet about whether killing him was the right thing to do or not. Some are arguing that Daryl was right to shoot him as there is a war taking place and it's too risky to take chances, whilst others think it was a dick move in making a promise that the guy wouldn't get hurt, only to then cowardly kill him anyway. At this moment in time, I'm swaying more towards the second option. I did think Daryl was a bit of an arsehole for killing him, but whatever the viewer's opinion, I think it can only be a positive thing that the show is sparking this kind of worthwhile debate. Anyway, getting away from Rick and Daryl, I said a moment ago I wanted to talk about Aaron, so let's do it. Continuing on from the previous episode, Aaron finds himself still fighting the saviours alongside other residents of Alexandria. My initial reaction when being transported back to the firefight once again was a feeling of shock that it was still ongoing. I thought it pretty much ended last time around, but obviously not. With Eric suffering from a gun wound, Aaron attempted to get him away from the battlefield, placing him next to a tree and promising to come back for him after things had finished. Unfortunately, Aaron proved to be too late, as Eric ended up turning into a wandering corpse. Well, at least that's what I think happened. The reason I say that is because the show was somewhat weirdly ambiguous about his death. When Aaron returned to where he had left Eric, he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was only blood and a walker in the distance who was alluded to be Eric. However, when Aaron tried to kill the walker, another Alexandrian stopped him and said to Aaron that's not him. Now, it's highly likely the guy just said this to Aaron in an attempt to try and comfort him. Even though it was Eric in the distance, it was no longer the real Eric that Aaron knew, because sadly he had already died, leaving his soulless remains to wander the earth. However, it could be argued that the walker genuinely wasn't Eric and was someone completely different. so when the dude said to Aaron that's not him, he may have meant it literally. Admittedly, I highly doubt this is the case, but it's easy to see how this scene could be misinterpreted, and I look forward to seeing Eric's return in season 16 only to have him be shot by Judith 10 minutes into the episode. Anyway, with Eric being most likely dead, I'll admit his passing was quite a sad moment despite me not really having any real attachment to his character. Most relationships on The Walking Dead have often come to a tragic end, and Aaron and Eric's felt like one of the few genuine ones remaining, so it was slightly touching seeing Aaron tell Eric how much he loved him. And credit where credit is due for Ross Marquand for putting in a great performance as Aaron. I felt like he showed real emotion throughout the episode, which caused Aaron's passing to be more affecting due to his brilliant acting. Speaking of brilliant acting, Lenny James once again proved his acting credentials with another stellar shift as the unhinged Morgan. We finally know what that scene in the season 8 trailer was about with Morgan and Jesus fighting, and it turns out that I wasn't too far off in my initial prediction. Jesus and Morgan come to blows due to their opposing ideologies. Jesus is intent on keeping the captured prisoners alive, whereas Morgan believes it would be better if they were all dead. Now I'm sorry for mentioning it every time Morgan goes a bit crazy, but everyone knows I love seeing him mad, and I thought he was probably the standout performer again during this installment. There's just something about the complete change of expression on Morgan's face and the way his eyes look completely dead when he's having an episode that makes me drawn to him. It may sound like quite a horrible thing to say, but in the past I've always enjoyed watching Morgan lose it because it makes for entertaining viewing. However, despite still being entertained by his madness during this episode, I also ended up feeling sorry for him and rather guilty for wanting to watch him suffer for so long. The reason I felt this stems from the moment in which Morgan admits to Jesus that he's not right but not wrong. Again, like the whole situation with Eric, this is another moment open to interpretation. It could be suggested that what Morgan meant was that although killing the prisoners wasn't the right thing to do morally, it was the right course of action to take to prevent further bloodshed. However, due to Morgan's repeated use of the phrase "I'm not right", I interpreted it more as Morgan admitting to Jesus that he wasn't alright in the head. He was essentially saying that even though he was crazy, as illustrated by him trying to kill Jesus, he was correct about needing to kill the prisoners. I feel that the fact that he walked off into the distance shortly after this piece of dialogue took place and proclaimed that he couldn't fight anymore shows that the war is tormenting him mentally. Morgan is not in any fit state to fight. Yes, he is a valuable weapon, but I came out of this episode feeling that he is somewhat just being used in a fight that's killing him inside. Like I previously said, normally I love seeing Morgan's internal conflict take place. However, this week I just felt really sad for him. It's obvious the guy clearly needs some help, and I feel as though he is suffering a great deal in fighting this war. Moving on from Morgan, the penultimate talking point this week concerns Maggie and Gregory at the Hilltop. Gregory, being the pathetic snake that he is, came to Hilltop's door begging to be taken in, and for some reason unbeknownst to me, Maggie let him come right in. It was one of those TV moments where you're just sitting there saying to yourself, don't do it, and then the character does it and you simply think, really, how stupid are you? I thought Maggie was more intelligent than that, but perhaps not. To add insult to injury, not only does Gregory worm his way back inside Hilltop, a couple of seconds later he is then seen telling the prisoners they aren't allowed in. What an absolute dick. So he's allowed a second chance but no one else is. I will admit I did laugh at the guy's audacity in even attempting to suggest the prisoners shouldn't be granted entry, but honestly I just can't stand Gregory. The sooner he is killed, the better. The last plot point I want to mention involves Ezekiel, Carol and the rest of the Kingdom soldiers. I'll keep it short because once again I believe their story arc was the weakest part of the episode. Truth be told, not a lot really happened. It was mostly just Ezekiel talking about how happy and jolly he was, whilst the Kingdom soldiers jumped up from behind some bushes and killed some saviours by scaring them to death. I honestly feel sorry for Carol for being dragged around with them, as so far this season her character has been criminally underutilised. Perhaps I'm being a tad harsh, but at the moment the Kingdom soldiers' antics don't really interest me. And so we come to the end of the video, and once again I feel like this is another episode of The Walking Dead that does have a lot going for it. It's fast paced and exciting like the rest of season 8 so far, and has some great standout character moments from Aaron and Morgan in particular. However, the weird decision to kill off Morales so quickly, coupled with Maggie's equally as bizarre choice to welcome back Gregory, and the stuttering storyline centered on Ezekiel, meant I didn't enjoy this episode as much as the previous two. However, 3 episodes into season 8 I really don't have a huge amount of things to complain about, and I'm enjoying this start to the season a lot more than the previous 2 years. The Walking Dead might not be back to the heights it was previously, but it's actually fun to watch again, and for now that's good enough for me. So there you have it, my review of the latest episode of The Walking Dead. Please let me know your thoughts below, and as always, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.